Dr. Asa Brown, a renowned psychologist, says this: communication is an art form that is crafted throughout our lives. Good afternoon, good evening, Sergeants. My name is Specialist Harvey, and this informational brief is over interpersonal communication and why it is important to our jobs as NCOs. So a quick agenda for today, but before we get started, the classification for this brief is unclassified, and I would like to thank my student group leader, Staff Sergeant Wemhoff, for taking the time to sit through us all while we watch these videos, and for taking time out of his day for grading these wonderful performances. The agenda is going to be the introduction, what is interpersonal communication. We're going to go over the transactional model of communication, active listening, paying attention to body language. We're going to then go into the conclusion, and then if there are any questions, we will talk about that afterwards. Now, the introduction. There are many facets of communication studies, and each is important to learn how to be better communicators. The most well-known facet and most studied is interpersonal communication. Interpersonal communication is a branch of the communication studies discipline. It focuses on the exchange of information and meaning between people. Throughout a normal day, you're going to have conversations. And in each of those conversations, what you don't realize is that there is a whole business deal happening behind the scenes. Interpersonal communication skills are often underdeveloped. To improve this communication, we must use the transactional model, we must be active listeners, and we must be able to recognize and pay attention to body language and nonverbal cues. In interpersonal communication, it is important to recognize your interactions with people as a transaction. And what does that mean? Well, when we speak to one another, we do so to gain information. This exchange of information is called a transaction. There are intricacies to this, and imagine communication as sending a message. The process of communication then would go as follows. The sender encodes information and encodes a message to send to the receiver. The message travels through the air where noise or anything that can affect how the receiver understands the message can affect it. It then goes to the receiver, and the receiver has a job to decode the message in order to understand what you're saying, and then encode another message to send back to you. This is the transactional model. This is important to understand because you have to properly encode your message and understand the person that you're sending it to. Meaning that you have to speak clearly and understand your listener to understand how to properly encode it. And so that way the receiver of that message can understand and reply. And using the transactional model will allow our communication to be more fluid and more dynamic, and allow our conversations to be unaffected by all the noise that happens in a normal conversation. There are other things that can affect how we have great communicative transactions, and it is important to have a full transaction. You must know how to properly listen. It is important to know how to actively listen in order to reduce the noise in your communication. Active listening is the art of listening with many or all of your senses. It is important to practice this art because according to mindtools.com, we only remember between 25 and 50% of what we hear. This relates to the NCO Corps and our job as non-commissioned officers, because when we are telling our soldiers something that they are only remembering 50% of what we're telling them, we can help their retention by having them write down the instructions that we are giving them and have them focus on us while we were speaking. We can also have them repeat back to us what we had just said. It is crucial to note that there are different types of listening styles, and it is important to recognize when each of those styles would be effective. The different kinds are empathetic, informative, and critical listening styles. Now we're going to go through a couple examples of when to use each of these styles and when each one would be most important. So empathetic is also known as the counseling listening style. You're going to use that a little bit more when you're going to have an emotional conversation, say with a loved one, or a soldier that's going through a rough time. When you are having this kind of listening, it's important to not just nod and interrupt them by saying, I see or I understand. You're wanting to be a mirror. They're talking to you, and you want to accept everything that they're saying. Now, this doesn't mean that you necessarily have to agree with everything that they're saying. You're there to give advice and to just be there for that soldier or your loved one to vent to. Now, informative or decision making is kind of like what we're doing now, and what you as the audience is, what you guys are doing now, is listening to me give this brief so that way you can have the information to go out and translate it into your lives. And the final one is going to be critical or fact gathering. In this type of listening style, you are out there to gain information to make a decision. So an example of this would be the upcoming election. You're wanting to gain information so that way you can pick the right candidate that's going to align with your political views, whatever that may be. You would also use the critical listening style if your chain of command comes down and gives you a task and you're not really sure of what all that entails, so you're going to go out and get the information that you need to complete that task and make the decision of how to best complete that task. Now, an important part of listening is being able to listen or look and observe and understand body language or the nonverbal cues. An important part of active listening is recognizing body language, like I just said, and how important that is to our communication with our soldiers and with our friends in everyday life. Dr. Harvey says that over 93% of our communication is nonverbal. This means that we need to be effective with how we communicate with our soldiers. When we talk, we need to be standing straight. We need to look at our soldiers and make eye contact. And likewise, we need to see that our soldiers are giving nods or other form of communicative movements to check our understanding. Thank you for your nod, I do appreciate that. Facial expression is another great way that we can use to understand how our soldiers are feeling without them necessarily telling us. Sure, a soldier can say that they're doing fine, but if the look on their face says that they're not, then we know that something else is going on, and we need to use our empathetic listening style to dig a little bit closer into what's going on. And we need to be cognizant about how our soldiers' body movements are a close reflection of their attitudes. You know, if they're standing around just kind of slouching back, listening to what you're saying, they're not really listening to you. You know, you need to speak with them like an adult and then have them give you the same courtesy back when they're listening, so that way they can understand more than just the 50% of what they're going to be remembering. And this recognition of their body movements and their facial expressions will allow us to have a better approach to communicating not only with our personal relationships, but with peers, superiors, and the rest of our soldiers alike. And you can also use nonverbal cues while during a class. If you see confusion on the face of your soldiers, it tells you that you might need to re-explain something or reteach a certain class. And so that could be important, like the class that I just gave on converting asthmas. That could be kind of a confusing class. And if a soldier's feeling confused and they're not comfortable to ask for help in front of the rest of the class, if they're looking confused while I give them the 5 minutes to practice, I might just go up and help them out a little bit so that way they can understand how to convert asthmas a little bit better without having to feel embarrassed in front of their peers. And so we can see that nonverbal cues can be helpful with our communicative duties as NCOs. Now, in conclusion, interpersonal communication can be a scary task if you're unequipped. It was my goal of this informational brief to make you better equipped. And with great practice and knowledge of the subject of interpersonal communication, you will no longer have to be afraid of being misunderstood. And after listening, you should be better equipped. And when you speak, you should be able to see a conversation as a transaction. You should be able to be more cognizant about your listening style and be knowledgeable when you use each type of listening. And as we've gone through this, you should be able to see why each one is especially important to pay attention to. And finally, you should be on the lookout for nonverbal cues in a conversation, as opposed to just focusing on the words alone. Because when you do that, you only get 7% of what the sender of the message is actually saying, instead of the 93% of what they're telling you. Which is why messaging, emails, text just getting a voicemail are going to be hard to get a full transaction in a communication. We need to, face-to-face is going to be the best in most situations. And we should push these points onto our superiors and lower enlisted to foster an environment of effective communication. Now, my goal for you is to go out and learn more, to read essays on effective communication and watch great speakers, to learn good patterns that they're using and then to reflect those in your own communications. And I want you to go out and have great transactions. And just as Rome was not built in a day, neither will you be a perfect communicator without any practice. You have to practice every day. Now I'm going to move on. Does anybody have any questions before I conclude the brief? Okay, seeing that there are none, I would like to conclude the brief and relieve the floor to my SGL Staff Sergeant Wemhoff. I hope you have a great day. Thank you for bearing through this.